In the heated and fast-moving real estate market in BC, Vancouver, I often notice that neither the buyer nor their agent do have enough time to go through the contract of purchase and sale. All they do is rush into preparing the contract and submitting with the hope of winning the contract. For that reason, I decided to talk about contract of purchase and sale. Hello, my name is Shirin Saleh. I am the owner and managing broker of 88 West Realty. So, a contract of purchase and sale is used by two parties, seller and the buyer. This is a standard form and prepared by the Canadian Bar Association as well as Real Estate Canadian Association or BC Real Estate Association. So it is a standard form and it is a template. It includes several blanks according to the buyer and seller's needs. The blanks should be completed. Now, it contains about 6, 7, depending to the number of subjects and terms, up to maybe 10 pages. So I'm going to explain page by page. However, before we dive into this topic, would you please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you find the content here informative and useful. So, the contract of purchase and sale used in Vancouver, BC contains, as I said, several pages. The very first page does not form part of the contract. It just explains what is included in the contract. It defines the term. It says what the contract is, what is deposit, and in the middle of this very first page, it has become a common practice that the agents of the sellers and the buyers, they want the client to initial where it talks about the costs borne to the either buyer or the seller through this transaction. For example, seller is responsible to pay the commission or buyer is responsible to pay property transfer tax. So let's move on. Page number 1. Page number 1 describes basic information of the seller and the buyer, the real estate company, the agent who is preparing this contract, the description of the property, the civic address, plus the legal description of the property, as well as the price. The price, whatever price the buyer is willing to pay for the purchase of the property. Then the deposit. Typically in BC, deposit is 5 to 10%. So if you're buying a property for $1 million, you have to pay, or it is better to pay $50,000 or up to $100,000 as a deposit. Deposit is usually held with the buyer's agent's brokerage in trust. And sometimes a seller wants the deposit to be paid directly to the seller. That's possible. Now let's move to page number 2. Page number 2, or it could be extended to 3 and page number 4, it delineates the terms and conditions to the benefit of the seller or buyer. To the benefit of the seller, we usually put a term or subject of financing, or it could be inspection. It could be a review of title and its attachments. Or for the benefit of the seller, sometimes it could be the seller, if the seller finds the appropriate property in order to purchase, then they would decide to sell. If there is any tenant in the property, we might need to put a subject to address the tenancy concern. So this part is very, very important because the buyer and the seller should make sure that all their concerns, all their needs, whatever they have in mind should be listed and then should be addressed in the contract. Otherwise, it will not be binding. Whatever you want, please make sure you tell your agent to put it in the contract, to make it as a term of the contract, to make it binding. Otherwise, you won't be able to ask for it if it is outside of the contract. Another point which is very important is anything related to the agreement of the seller and the buyer, only these two parties should be included in the contract. Realtor's commission has nothing to do with the contract of purchase and sale, so does not need to be included in the contract. Has to be addressed in a separate addendum, separate agreement. Now, let's move to page number 3. Page number 3 starts with the dates of completion, possession, and adjustment. What is completion date? The date that the title of a property is transferred from the seller to the buyer is considered as the completion date or closing date. We often recommend that do not put the completion date on Friday. It should not be on weekend. It has to be or statutory holiday. It has to be during the weekdays. What is possession date? Is the date that the buyer will have possession of the property, will have the keys to the property, and will start using the property, and which is typically starts at a specific time. And what is the adjustment date? The adjustment date refers to the date that the buyer starts paying all the costs of holding a property, owning a property, such as property insurance, such as property tax, annual property tax, and any other costs. In this page also, we have to discuss or we have to explain what are the items included in the contract. If there are typically 2 different types of items included in the property, one of them is called chattels, the other one is called fixtures. So chattels could be like appliances, they can be moved. So anything that could be moved from the property, if the buyer wants to keep them, you have to write in the contract. Anything that is fixed, as the name says, so you don't need to mention, such as a bathtub, which is fixed to and then nobody would be able to move it from the property. If there is any specific items like picture frame, chandelier, or anything that as a buyer you really wish to have it, please make sure that you put it in the contract. Then it says viewed, the date that the buyer has viewed the property, so the seller is obliged to provide the property on the completion date with the same condition as it was viewed on the specific date. The other items in this contract, such as title, refers to the responsibility of the buyer to review the title, a copy of the title, also as well as a copy of the buyer should get a copy of the attachments or anything registered on the title. And this is the area which we highly recommend that the buyer consult with a lawyer, seek legal advice if the attachments or if the items registered on the title are very important and you can't understand the language. I hope you found the content of this video informative and useful. If yes, please don't forget, subscribe, like, share, leave your comments and questions in the descriptions. Stay tuned until the next video. Shirin Saleh.